Good morning, everyone. We're gonna continue through our study of First Corinthians. I've got my Bible. I've got my orange juice. So I hope you're ready to join along. And we're gonna go through beginning in verse 18. If you remember in chapter 3, verse 18. If you remember in chapter 3, Paul has been really setting the stage here. Helping them to understand the difference between an individual who is spiritual, an individual who is carnal. And the argument that he's making for them is that you are living lives of envy, strife, and division. He says, is that not carnal? Are you not behaving like just humans? Because that's how humans behave. They want what they don't have. They want to argue about it. And then they want to draw lines in the sand when they don't get their way. That's just the way people behave. And if you think about that, that's how kids behave, isn't it? It's children. Children behave that way. They want what they want. And then sometimes they want to stomp their feet, right? And then when they don't get what they want, they get a hissy fit and they go to their room, they slam their door. I mean, that's how children behave. And so the parents' job is to get them to see and to understand you can't act that way. You can't behave that way. And Paul's basically telling them, you're behaving that way. And he doesn't say this, and I know I'm making up, I'm pulling this out, but I'm just saying that quit acting like children is what he's saying. Spiritual children, for sure. And so he talks about how the workers and the work, Paul and Apollos are the workers, and Corinth is the work, especially when you go and look at chapter 9, in verse 1, it says, are you not my work in the Lord? And so this is who Paul is laboring for. It's a labor of love. He doesn't want them to be carnal. He doesn't want them to not be spiritual. He wants them to be spiritual. That's why he's working on them. But at the end of the day, when you put all your labor and all your effort and all your work into somebody, you don't know the kind of Christian they're going to be. And there's a wide variety of things that they could be. Gold, silver, precious stones, wood, straw, hay. And when the test comes, they may get burned up. And Paul's saying, and the worker is going to suffer loss. And I think what he's saying is, I'm going to suffer loss. It's going to hurt. It's going to be extremely disappointing if that happens. He says, but he himself will be saved, yet so as through fire. In other words, Paul's saying, I still have hope of salvation, but that doesn't mean this life is going to be easy for me. And that's so true. Life does not just get easier because you become a Christian. And so you don't know if a Christian's going to fall away. God's the one who does the increase. He's the one who knows the hearts. He's the one who knows we don't. But at the end of the day, you also need to know that the individual who is a Christian, who is built on that foundation, is a temple. In other words, the individual, the Christian, is holy because God dwells in their life. That's what temple means. And so God dwells in their life, and he says, if anyone corrupts or defiles or causes to fall away that temple, that dwelling place of God, God will destroy that person. So you don't know what the Christian is going to be. You don't know how the Christian is going to behave in the world. You don't know if the Christian is going to fall away. But you better not be the one, and I better not be the one that causes him to. That causes him to be corrupt, causes it to be him or her to be defiled, to cause him or her to fall away from the Lord. And the reason is because you are the temple, you are the dwelling place of God, and that dwelling place of God is holy. And that's what you are. You are that temple. You are that dwelling place. You are holy. And so for that reason, that's the argument. You don't be the cause of it getting burnt up. So in verse 18, going back to what causes someone to burn up, right? That's what I wanted to go into next. What causes someone to burn up? Well, in the discussion that he's had so far, could it be imposing worldly wisdom? Could it be enforcing worldly wisdom? Could it be not pushing spiritual influence? I think so. Because when someone is sinning, as someone is living in sin, and you tell them you can continue living that way, you are aiding in their corruption. And you can't do that. And so we cannot permit sin in our own lives, but we also have to hold each other accountable in love. And he says, let no one deceive himself, in verse 18, if anyone among you seems to be wise in this age. In other words, you're coming to the situation, you say, I have got this wisdom, I know what you need to do, I know how this needs to be. Where's your wisdom coming from? Is it spiritual? Is it from God? No one knows the mind of God but the Spirit. So, is that where you're getting it from? Or are you getting it from man? We just had this long conversation about that. And now he's made this basically this warning that you better not be the cause of the individual becoming corrupt. So if you think you're wise, you better make sure it's the right kind of wisdom. And if you think you've got advice and you think that you know the way things ought to be, you better have the right source. And that your source better not be from this age, but it better be timeless. Right? God's advice is timeless. The Word of God is timeless. There are situational things, opinions, and things like that. But God's Word is timeless. If you take your advice and your opinions and your wisdom from this age, you've already missed the mark. You have to get it from God. He says, let him become a fool that he may become wise. In other words, you look at the world and you say, that's foolish. And when you do that, you become the fool. And people are going to look at you funny. The world is going to look at you funny. Family members, friends may even look at you funny. I remember my dad, when he was converted to the church, he told his family, and they were like, what? What are you talking about? And then he'd say, yeah, you should obey the gospel as well. And many of them were like, nah, that's silly, that's foolish. Well, it was. It was to them. It was from a worldly perspective. And so my father, in order to find wisdom from God, he became a fool. And you have to be willing to do that, Paul says. And so, verse 19, for the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God, for it is written, he catches the wise in their own craftiness. And again, the Lord knows the thoughts of the wise, and they are futile. Don't think that God doesn't know the way people think in the world today. Don't think he doesn't know their wisdom. Don't think he doesn't understand what that wisdom is going to produce in the world. He knows. He absolutely knows. I remember there was one preacher who was talking about sex outside of marriage. And he said, look out at the world and look at all the spreading sexually transmitted diseases. And that all this sexual promiscuity and free love and all of this stuff, look at what it's producing in the world. Now, what do you think? Do you think there should be sex outside of marriage? If you knew that relationship within the confines of a beautiful relationship of marriage, wouldn't that be the way to go? And not just passing on all of these things. I'd say, well, you could have just allowed promiscuity without all the spreading of the diseases. And it's like, well, that's not what happened. Man's wisdom didn't produce that. Man's wisdom produced the spread of the diseases, and it still does. So it's not that he didn't know what would happen. He knew what would happen if people just started having sex outside of marriage and were promiscuous. He knew what would happen. You can't get one by God. Oh, God hasn't thought of this. I was reading a book and a guy was arguing with God. It was like a little illustration in the book, and he was arguing with God. He makes an argument, and God goes, "Ah, you got a good point." And then God walks away. No. You're not going to give an argument to God that he hasn't heard before. You're not going to be able to persuade or influence God with something that he's never heard before. God can't be tempted. So God knows the thoughts of the wise, and he knows their wisdom. He knows human wisdom. And you're not going to pull one over on him. Verse 21, therefore let no one boast in men, for all things are yours, whether Paul or Apostle or Cephas, or the world or life or death or things present or things to come, all are yours, and you are Christ, and Christ is God. So this human wisdom, this wisdom from the world, it doesn't belong to you. It's man's. Let them have it. It corrupts. That's what it does. It defiles. It's not going to produce a good result in you. But you have all of these resources. You have all of these things that can benefit you and that you can go to. Paul, Apollos, Cephas, they're resources. They function in that way. They're not the source of your salvation. No, they're workers. You are the work. But they're good resources. The things in the world. I mean, you can use it as a resource. Life or death, things present or things to come. Use those things. Use whatever you need. But at the end of the day, you belong to Christ. And that changes, and Christ is God. So that changes everything. It changes the way you see the world. It changes the way you see life. It changes the way you see death. It changes the way you see Paul, Apollos, and Cephas. It changes the way you see things present or things to come. Everything is different when you look at life through the lens that you belong to Christ. Wisdom changes. Foolishness changes. And so, you're talking about a spiritual source. We've been talking about a spiritual source. God is the spiritual source. Man is the carnal source. Man is the source of wisdom that's unreliable and ultimately is just going to cause things to burn up, the individual to burn up. And so you don't be the one that encourages that burn up. You don't be the one that encourages that leading someone away, corrupting someone, defiling someone. But if you think you're wise, according to men, you really need to make sure, you need to check yourself. Where is your wisdom coming from? Because if if your wisdom is coming from God, I mean, if from men, if you're boasting in men, then then it changes the way you see things. But if you are looking at it from the perspective of you belong to Christ, then now you have all of these different resources, and they can benefit you, and they won't cause you to be corrupted. 15 minutes in, and that's, I think, everything that I wanted to say. So next time we will continue on in chapter 4 and continue our discussion. And I hope you're enjoying this study through 1 Corinthians. And I know I have been. These are things that I've wanted to study for a long time, and finally getting down and getting to do that has been something that I've really enjoyed. So I will see you next time, and hope you have a great week. I'll talk to you later.